All right, class. Hey, this is Professor Stevenson or Brandon Stevenson or Steve-O, whatever you want to call me today. This week we wanted to go over ISO. I'd mentioned in an announcement last week that I was going to post it then. Decided to post it this week. There was some confusion with the SAE report that's due today, Monday, February 6th. Because of that, I'm going to change it a little bit. A couple of you have already submitted that. So what I'll do is, for those that have submitted the assignment or those that are about to submit the assignment, there's just going to be a slight edit to those that haven't had a chance to see it. So what happened is I published the assignment but didn't publish the module that was part of the assignment. So some were able to see it just going by like the syllabus, and in the front page it'll show you the assignments that are there. Others go through module. Honestly, I probably would have done the same thing by going through module, seeing that it wasn't there, and all of a sudden Monday morning, hey, I've got a report due today. That sucks. So I'm going to, just change it a little bit for you guys. So this week we're going over the ISO. What's interesting is this is the first time me teaching this class, and John Kelly is the one teaching it previously, and he could talk about ISO for a couple of hours or any of these topics. And me, I'm just kind of I understand what they are, the importance of them, and hopefully you guys can glean that same amount of here's what's important about the ISO, about SAE, about OSHA, and all about why you take this course. So anyways, let's start with ISO and just kind of talk about their history. What's really nice about it, if you go to their the main page, so just ISO about us, they kind of go over their history, which is really awesome. So if you look at ISO, started back in 1946 in London. And well, what does ISO stand for? So it's the International Standards Organization, or International Organization of Standardization, just depending on how you read it. But what's cool about it is if you compare them versus SAE, they both kind of have the same goal of being able to support standardization. We'll give an example of that, like in car seats and a couple other the ISOs that I pulled up just to go through. But if we look at their history, started in 1946, 65 delegates from 25 countries. They met together to discuss the future of just international standardization. So if we think about early 1900s, late 1800s, a lot of manufacturing happening in these different countries. And well, what happens if you ship something that's the wrong container size? Is it going to fit on your type of ship? So that's one of the standardizations that they have, is just talking about like container size. So they created their first offices in 1949 in Geneva. As people know, Geneva is a pretty big deal when it comes to Geneva Convention and so forth. They released their first standard in 1951. At that time, it's just kind of a recommendation. And one of the great things, if you look at standards, they are essentially recommendations. Nobody has to follow them. However, there's a lot of laws that are going to reference standards. So if we look at high voltage safety, a lot of those reference SAE or ISO standards of what you should do to be safe. And the same thing happens with vehicle manufacturers with VIN numbers. They'll reference a standard. And there's actually a standard created by ISO for what the VIN format should look like. So they created this ISO journal in 1952, and that's published. And if you go online, they shows like the last 10 years or so, but you can go back and review all of those ISO standards and see what did they have in 1952, if you can have access to that. It's every, I think they release 6 of these per year, just different journals that give everybody updates on standards that they've created. Sorry, I misclicked there. They had the General Assembly in Stockholm in 1955. ISO at the time, 35 members with 68 standards. Again, recommendations that they reviewed. They talk about the international standards system of units. So if we look at ISO, like ISO brake flares, that is an ISO standard for that brake flare. So if you've ever done a brake flare and it's the ISO, well, that is something that was created by this international organization. They start pushing out a little bit more. I'd mentioned the freight containers. So it wasn't until 1968 that they created the standard freight container size. If we think about that, as we are this global economy, this global commerce of trading goods back and forth, if you had a container from one country that was 14 by 14 and another one that's 14 by 50, you're going to have some issues when it comes to stacking them and getting them on there. So in 68, they said, okay, here's the standard freight container size, but is there just one standard or is there a couple? We're looking to get some freight containers here at the Davis campus here at Weber State because we just got so much stuff that we moved over from the Ogden campus and we just need a place to store it. And there are two different types of freight containers that we can get. So they do have a standard, but it's more than just one. It's not every freight container has to be the exact same size. So I'll just click through a couple more. I like this one talking about ISO 9000 family. And the reason that I like talking about this is it kind of makes me think about car seats. So if we look back to the history of car seats, for those that are older than me, you might recall what some of the crazy things that we saw in the 50s and earlier of what was normal or acceptable for somebody or child to be in a car seat. So we've got this version. Hey, it's just a baby that's strapped in with a pillow under them and they're just supposed to lay there and stay happy. This one I like. It was somebody decided to create their own car seat. When I brought home my first baby, the nurse walked out with us and made sure that A, we had a car seat, B, that we had it buckled in correctly, and C, that we knew how to buckle the baby in correctly after all of that. If we look back into the 1930s, it's kind of surprising how many kids were able to survive just from some of these haphazard put together car seats. Look at this one. So you can continue and just look at all of the different options that they had for car seats until the standard came out. This reminds me of the ones that they have for dogs out nowadays. So you can strap your dog into your back seat so it's kind of safe. But that's what they were doing with toddlers. Basically just put it on a leash and buckle that child in. This is another interesting one. So if the kid face plants right into the pillow, that should keep them safe. You've got the standard buckle that's supposed to keep this little dog kennel thing together. And then in the 2000s, they started to focus a little bit more on the standardization, make car seats a little bit better, and so forth. If you look at the ISO guide for child car seat safety, you can actually review a lot of that information. Since I don't have access to this one, I could buy it. But if you look at all of the ISO standards, so this is ISO standard 50, last update in 2014, all of the different subtitles of what they should be focusing on. What I found interesting in, see if we can find it, like terms and definitions. So even at the beginning of this standard, and a lot of the standards that I've looked at, possibly all of them, have this same type of creation of, all right, here's the terms and definitions. So when you're looking at this ISO standard, you're determining, okay, let's make sure everybody's on the same page of what we're considering a child. A child is a person aged 14 years and younger. What does harm mean? Injury or damage to the health of people, so on and so forth. So when you review all the ISO standards, they're going to give you these terms of conditions, and then the general approach, and then the actual standard itself. So when you buy a car seat now, it should have a ISO standard on it saying how safe and what type of safety rating it accounts for. One of the standards that I like the most by ISO is that VIN structure. Yes, I'm happy with my cookies. Thank you very much. So if you look at the preview, unfortunately, the abstract doesn't provide that much. I want to see, hey, give me the basic content of a VIN, and it won't. However, we're able to find that in our wonderful Wikipedia. Wikipedia is not always the most accurate source, but sometimes they'll have some good information. So with your standard VIN, you got your 17 digits, and based on the ISO 3779 standard, this is what it should look like. So you're going to have your world manufacturer identifier, the vehicle description, and then the actual vehicle identifier itself. North America, if you're in North America, you have 2,000 or fewer vehicles per year. This is the type of format that you should be utilizing. So if you were to pull a VIN number on Tesla back in 2008, 2009, I would hope that this is the format that they used. However, one that's created more recently, it should be using this format. So you're having your sequential number instead of having the manufacturer identifier plus the sequential number after the fact. Just because of how many vehicles you're going to produce, you need to have a longer sequential number. When I was looking at VINs, it reminded me of this from my previous life when it came to CAN bus. So this is an SAE standard. We covered SAE the last couple of weeks. This is SAE J1939. And if you look at the bit configuration, this is what they're expecting. The start of the frame, the identifier, RTR, and then what is happening in the frame itself. So it's really cool to see that not only does SAE care about this stuff, obviously ISO cares about a lot of that standardization as well. If you go to the Wikipedia page, you can look at all of these different VIN numbers and how they're all following the same format, because ISO came out and said that. I was in San Jose during the summer. They had a ADAS convention, or ADAS, Advanced Driver Assistance System convention. And it was interesting to me that a lot of the manufacturers there were saying that, yes, ISO is where they need to be, giving us all the information and standardization and requirements for vehicles with ADAS. But here in North America, we're waiting for NHTSA to tell us what we actually have to do, which is difficult to comprehend, because ISO, again, doesn't give you a rule or regulation. They're just saying, here's what you can do. Here's a recommendation. Here's the standard that you should follow. And SAE has the same thing. I believe that's SAE J3016. Let's see. Yeah. So our SAE J3016, talking about our standard levels of automation. If anybody has a chance to visit Davis campus, you'll see I've got a giant poster of this screwed to the wall above my work area, where these are the SAE levels. And when I was at that convention, they're saying, well, NHTSA hasn't told us what we need to do yet. Like, yeah, NHTSA hasn't given you what the regulation requirements are, or National Highway Traffic Safety Association, but these are still the same standards, the levels that we're expecting, and ISO does the same thing. Here's what the different levels or expectation of automation are. So kind of interesting stuff. Now, to go back to seatbelts and what these standards are, we've got this video that was created by ISO that kind of reviews some of it. So that's really cool. Let's watch it.
We live in an amazing world, full of incredible opportunities and endless possibilities. But it can also be a complex and overwhelming place. When things don't work as they should, it often means that standards are absent. But when ISO standards are applied, life is just so much richer. ISO standards help to make the world a safer, cleaner, and more efficient place. From food safety to computers, from healthcare to new technologies. There are many challenges facing our environment, economy, and society. ISO can make a positive difference to all our lives, utilizing a wealth of international experience and wisdom. In today's ever-changing world, ISO standards help create growth, open up global markets, and make trade fairer, including for developing countries. ISO standards can help tackle global challenges like climate change, road safety, energy, and social responsibility. ISO standards touch almost everything we do, keeping us connected and entertained, making us more productive, more creative, sharing ideas, promoting innovation, and keeping us safe and healthy. ISO is the world's largest developer of voluntary international standards, with over 18,000 standards for nearly every aspect of technology and business. For over 60 years, a network of standards bodies in 163 countries, working in partnership around the world and right here at home. ISO builds confidence for today, for tomorrow, and for the future.
Thank you, ISO. Now, moving on to the next section, we'll be talking about different additional standards that they have. And health and safety is one of the things that we generally think about for regulations or standards or requirements. It's something around our safety and health. What is really cool about this ISO 45001 is they do have a comparison of what this is versus what OSHA looks like. So here's another video where they're going over what's the difference between OSHA's 18001 and then ISO's 45001.
It has a wider concept of risk and opportunity. The requirements for consultation and participation are enhanced from 18001. Also, there is a element about context of the organization that wasn't in the old 18001, and finally, it now follows a common structure of other management system standards, which actually help you to integrate. If you've got ISO management system standards for quality and environment, for example, it's now much easier to implement that because they're all in the same structure.
Most of the standards that have come before ISO 45001, they really just talked about the actual employee, which is governed by regulatory regimes throughout the world. This says a worker is anybody that the organization actually has control or direct their actual work. And that can be supply chain, can be contractors, that can be interns, that can be anything associated with anyone coming on site.
I think in the past with the OSHA standard, occupational health wasn't something that really featured. And with the new 45001, occupational health is standing out much more clearer.
One of the new things about ISO 45001 is considering the context of the organization, which is very important. So all those external and internal factors that can affect both the occupational health and safety hazards, but also the way the management system may function. There's much greater focus on leadership and inclusion of worker participation. And finally, the term documented information, which is a subtle but quite important difference, because it means it's for the organization to determine how it will manage its documented information. It's recognizing we live in a digital age where documentation is created and stored in all manner of ways, but it does provide a great opportunity for considerably reducing paperwork within the system.
So then what you can do, reviewing more about the standards, okay, let's say, hey, I want to see what all is in 18001 or the ISO 45001. How do you find out more? You can get a certification assessment done, ensuring that everybody's there. And then if you want to review it beforehand, you actually have to kind of purchase the 45001 standard. So I found that kind of interesting looking at ISO's group of, okay, what do I do to purchase that? So to review or purchase a standard, you have to first go to the store, what the ISO standard is, search for it. It'll come up in the search results. And then, okay, how do I purchase it? So this is, I just had to Google what CHF was, and I'll pull it over here. So that's a Swiss franc, and there's the net conversion. So $1.08 USD equates to 1 Swiss franc. So this particular, the practical guide for ISO 45001, to purchase it, it's 40 francs. Or Swiss francs. And let me do that conversion. It's roughly $43.11. So all the different ISO standards, you can go in and then purchase them. And a lot of them are put in this kind of practical guide format. So it's a lot easier to review. Let's see what the preview looks like. And then later in this week or next week, I'll be posting a video going over OSHA, which we have the OSHA standards, which we can review. And what's nice about the OSHA standards, it's a little bit easier to navigate through. A lot more of their content is free, so you can just review those OSHA regulations. So we'll do some of that later this week or early next week, posting a video about that. So yeah, that's what we have today around ISO. What I'd like everyone to do is just go to ISO.org and then navigate around, find something that you find interesting. So to me, the net zero guidelines are pretty interesting, mostly because there's so much drive for different companies and countries right now pushing to that net zero. And well, what actually does net zero mean? Are we just being focused on what our organization is directly creating, or do we care about what our organization is creating in regards to emissions from second parties? So previous life Cummins, where did we get our iron ore? Well, Rio Tinto is a big supplier of iron ore. So if we, a company, are net zero, does that include all the emissions created by the supplier Rio Tinto or not? So being able to understand what those ISO determines, what is net zero, might be really interesting to look at. Google, I believe. Let's go to Google. There you go. Carbon neutral since 2007. What does that actually mean, Google? So we can see what their version is. So for them, they're producing or purchasing renewable energy. Well, I understand that you're purchasing renewable energy, but again, are you incorporating what emissions were generated to put up your wind farm or put up your solar panels? So it's all about how far or how long the tailpipe is. And if we look at the push for electric vehicles, it's kind of that same concept. Okay, the electric vehicle isn't producing any emissions, but how far is that tailpipe? In Utah, it's very big for coal electricity. So if I'm powering my coal by electricity created by a coal plant, am I really that net neutral? I don't know. That's up to debate. So again, I'm going to update the assignment for this week. So for those that did the SAE, you'll be good. And then I just want everybody to say, yep, I've watched this video, and then to review something on this website from ISO standards, which you found that is interesting. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate your patience this semester, and we will be talking to everybody soon. Cheers.